It's a real pleasure to see everybody back. And it's my pleasure. You heard me give a thanks out earlier to the National Cathedral. Let me bring up the person who's going to introduce our keynote speaker and also bring some words of greeting from one of our co-hosts. I mentioned earlier, we at Enterprise are a member of HAND and are really excited about being in collaboration with not only the Cathedral this year, but also with HAND. Heather Raspberry is the executive director of this organization, and for those who know in the industry, has really been a driving force for a lot of work around regionalism and the movement to really get to real impacts and results. So I want to, again, thank Heather as we bring her up and her team for all the work they've done. So let's give a big hand to Heather Raspberry.
There you go. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Heather Raspberry. I'm the executive director of the Housing Association of Nonprofit Developers, affectionately known as HAND. And we're really excited to see all of you here today. I do want to first thank Enterprise and the Washington National Cathedral for the opportunity to collaborate on today's summit, because it truly aligns with HAND and what we represent, which is partnership. We are a collective of 400 plus organizations who are dedicated to not only creating, but preserving affordable housing throughout the Washington region, and our members expand from Baltimore through DC and as far south as Richmond, Virginia. Today, our membership consists of real estate developers, architects, service providers, government agencies, financial institutions, property management companies, general contractors, and a bevy of other stakeholders whose partnership is required to bring strong, thriving communities to fruition. I see many of our members here, and I look forward to the great work that is to come as a result of the connections made today. Partners and good partners really make the world go round. Whether it's an affordable housing development, a business deal, or votes needed to pass legislation, when we work with each other, we know that we can move the needle. In the case of today's program, we recognize that the partnership between the faith community and real estate professionals is one with tremendous potential. In fact, we've seen this relationship flourish time and time again at HAND, where faith-based organizations have been at the table since we were founded nearly 30 years ago. As we think about what steps each of us can take when we leave today, I encourage you to take inventory. We know the needs, but what gifts can your organization offer? What actions can you take to help us reach our common goals? Maybe it's working with each other in the Faith-Based Development Initiative to reach its goal of developing 5,000 new homes. Maybe your organization could facilitate critical services like tutoring or provide volunteers needed to carry out the work. The commitment you make today can be the change we see next month, next year, or 10 years from now. At HAND, we have also thought about our responsibility to these efforts, and we will be rolling out our own housing indicator tool in February of 2020. And this is going to be a platform that will track housing production across the entire region and hold public and private sectors accountable for making progress on expanding housing options. If you'd like to learn more about HAND and the various programming and capacity building activities that we have, our team is here with us today. Courtney Battle is our membership director. She's there in the back. You can always contact us or reply to your registration emails, and we will make sure we get you plugged in. Whatever your contribution may be, it's on all of us to do our part so that our friends and neighbors can truly live their best lives. We look forward to working with all of you in your various capacities. With that, today's keynote speaker is no stranger to supporting his community. Bishop Walter Thomas is the senior pastor at New Psalmist Baptist Church in Baltimore, Maryland, where he has led its congregation since 1975. Under Bishop Thomas's leadership, the church's membership has climbed from 200 to over 7,000, while he developed programs of evangelism, mission, and education. He is also a highly regarded executive and personal coach with over 30 years of experience in working with church leaders, pastors, church staff, and building effective ministry teams. In 2005, he was elevated to the office of Bishop and Presiding Prelate of the Kingdom Association of Covenant Pastors. In addition to providing pastoral leadership, Bishop Thomas is the past president of the Hampton University Ministers Conference. Under his leadership, the conference attendance doubled. He is also a well-known author of 4 books: Spiritual Navigation for the 21st Century, Good Meat Makes Its Own Gravy, Outstanding Black Sermons, Volume 4, and Hanging On by a Thread. Bishop Thomas is a scholar, having received his Bachelor of Science degree from University of Maryland, a Master of Divinity from Howard University, and a Doctor of Ministry degree from St. Mary's Seminary and University. In addition to his earned degrees, Bishop Thomas was bestowed with an honorary Doctor of Divinity degree from Virginia Seminary and Bethune-Cookman College. So with that, it is my pleasure to welcome Bishop Walter Thomas.
Amen. Thank you, Heather. You know, it's always good to hear a good introduction, because then if you don't say anything, you can escape out the back door. But I want to thank her for that introduction, and I want to thank my friend of many years, Leonard Hamlin, for making sure I got here all in one piece. But it has been exciting to listen to what is going forward, to hear what pastors are saying. My colleague from Baltimore, Bishop Dante Hickman, and I can say this because I know his work, did not blow any smoke at you, but spoke exactly about what he is doing in the city of Baltimore. And I think you ought to give the National Cathedral and Enterprise a big hand for putting something like this together. I have an interesting charge to be the luncheon speaker. And that turkey sandwich was getting good to me, and I don't know if it was getting good to anybody else. So I hope I can hold your interest between chews and sips. But I promise you I shan't be long, and then we shall get to the Q&As. But I want to talk for the time that shall be mine about a church that refocuses hope. A church that refocuses hope. Some years ago, I was introduced to the term, the suburbanization of poverty. I remember hearing it and rearing up, because it was the first time that phrase had entered into conversation for me. It was the first time I was privileged to hear someone describe what I knew as an urban reality as a suburban reality. It almost seemed to me as if it was oxymoronic, because when I grew up, I'm a son of the 60s, born in the 50s, and 60s and the 70s are when I was coming of age. And so when I grew up, urban meant problem, and suburban meant prosperity. Let me say that again. Urban meant problem. Though I didn't know I grew up in the ghetto until I went to college, I knew that the urban environment was totally different from the suburban environment. At least in the city where I hailed from, Baltimore, we had cement in the back, not always grass. Our homes were locked together. We called them row houses. They later were introduced as townhouses. We could hear and interpret conversations next door with just a glass on the wall. Somebody here's witness. And people sat regularly on the stoop, not the steps, but the stoop out front after washing it down, and carried on conversation with neighbors, as all persons worked in the same kind of jobs. Many did days work, a term not heard much anymore, working in somebody's home, doing laundry, cooking food, while their sons and daughters maintained the home, many of which found themselves in trouble along the way and wound up in jail. So the urban environment was known to me as problem, and the suburb was known as prosperity. They had the big malls. They had the fancy stores. They had everything. The church I grew up in did not have an upstairs. We only had a downstairs. Somebody said, what? Yes, we ran out of money when we finished building the basement. And so we worshiped in the basement of our church until I was at least on my way to college. And then we finally got an upstairs and other floors. So the suburban life was altogether different. And the urban life was problem. Suburb was prosperity. Seemed oxymoronic then, in my 60s, to hear someone use the term the suburbanization of poverty. When I grew up, poverty was localized. Poverty was, yes, a rural phenomenon, but not a suburban phenomenon. Rural people who live far out with limited learning might be impoverished, but not those who had managed to make their mark in the suburbs, who had moved to the fringes of what we called in school the standard metropolitan area, statistical area. They were out in the county. They were out in the nice area where you had grass, where your home was not next door to someone else, where a glass could not hear the conversation, where you did not have a string in a can, where everybody had a car, where folk had money, where TVs, and I hope there's someone my age here, where TVs didn't just play from a quarter. There are some folk here who remember the TVs we put the money in, and that's how you watch TV till you paid for it. Oh, yes. The box was on the side of the television. And when it ran out of change, you went to your neighbors and cashed $1 and came back and put more money, and they come by and take the change every week. And eventually, in the city, in the urban environment, you would pay off your black and white television. In the county, they had color. In the city, we had color from a hardware store. 3 colors, red, green, and blue, put on the front of your TV screen. So when I heard in my 60s this term, the suburbanization of poverty, I was awestruck because I could not believe that a phenomenon that had not only haunted but hurt so many people I knew had found its way across the city lines and had found a place to inhabit. And it was none other than the lush suburbs that we had admired. They were now experiencing poverty. And the sad thing about it was they were nowhere prepared to handle this new influx of unbelievable pain. They were nowhere prepared to handle it like the city that had grown up with it. They didn't have buses so people couldn't travel. They didn't have clinics so folk could go to. Some of us in the city only thought a doctor's office was a clinic. But in the suburbs, those things were not existing. Those things were not found. And the people in the suburbs found themselves with less resources to combat the problems of substandard housing, of dementia, of mental illnesses, social problems, because the suburbs were not prepared for what the cities had endured. And into that mix, almost floating down like a leaf from a tree on a fall afternoon, is the body of Christ, starting both in the city where the pain has lived, and now being sent to the suburbs where the pain yet inhabits. It's easy to convince people that pain exists in the city. It is difficult to convince people that poverty is like an infection. It doesn't show up till you get to the hospital sometime. People are sick long before they know it. And the infection has hit the suburbs now. And it's taking time for folk to realize that the problem is there also. And yet floating down almost like a leaf on a fall afternoon is the body of Christ, coming to announce to both suburb and citizen that there is yet hope for people who are struggling. The city's been dealing with this. Those churches in the city have recognized and realized this problem for a while and have sought to find solutions, some of which have worked and some of which haven't. Those in the counties and those in the suburban realities, suburban parts. Here we are in Washington, D.C., holding this conference, and I listened to my friend Anthony Moore talk about what's happening in PG County and what they're trying to do. And one would think he is in a slightly difficult area, but PG County has money. Oh, they have money. They just have not reached the point where they believe the problem is as real as it is. Because the problem is in the city, in the urban area, and the prosperity is in the suburban area. But the title of the conference recognizes there's a creeping, crawling infection. It's not limited to any one area, but all of us have got to somehow swing into action to defeat this thing before it takes over everywhere. Somebody missed that. We've got to defeat this thing before it takes over everywhere. How did it get to the suburbs? It got to the suburbs because it was allowed to live in both the rural area and the city. Let me say that again. I have to reiterate. How did this infection get to the suburbs? When we were riding up to the National Cathedral, I was saying to my friend who was driving me over, Willie, I said, Willie, I haven't been in this section of Washington. So I pulled up Zillow. Some go to Google, some go to Zillow. I went to Zillow to check out the pricing around here. Now let me tell you, to put it in ghetto language, you gotta have bank to live up in here. Am I right? You gotta have bank. When you ride through certain counties, not far from this border, you gotta have bank to live up in here. And that's what makes it so difficult for folk to believe that the infection that they thought was localized in the urban area is creeping its way into the suburbs, forcing its way here, and will soon, right now it's calling to be heard, but soon it will demand to be heard. Soon we can't escape the realities that the schools are facing, that children come with problems they are not prepared to handle. Soon they will face what the job market faces, that folk are coming for jobs without the skills that they normally had. Soon they will face what the government is facing. We are not getting the kind of revenue we need to get from property. Why? Because the infection has struck here too. And floating down like a leaf on a fall afternoon is the body of Christ. Churches planted in both city and suburb, declaring that there is hope. That there is hope. That people do not have to die in winter, that they can live and survive. Pastor Hickman talked about East Baltimore, a blighted area that one had just about given up on, seeing grass grow, for all the seedlings had been killed. But yet now, there's a glimmer of light beginning to shine. Hope. Anthony Moore talking about what he's trying to do in PG County. Hope. Other churches talking about what they're trying to do. Hope. But is more needed? Absolutely more is needed. And I'll tell you why. And it's why the church has to be the haven of hope. Crisis brings out cash, but it doesn't always bring out change. Crisis brings out cash, but it doesn't always bring out change. And the reason is because the amount given is never based on helping. It's just getting past hurting. The amount given is never based on really helping, changing the problem. It's just based on getting past the hurt from the reality that's upon us. Freddie Gray is the living example of the modern era of crisis in the city in which I live, or around which near I live and where I pastor Baltimore. Persons threw money at every project known to man, but we still have blight. We still have limited access to capital. We still have food deserts. We still have housing blight. We still have an urbanization of poverty. Why? Because the intent was never really to solve a problem. It was just to get past the hurt that was generated by the crisis. The bad feeling, the bad taste in the mouth of what this symbolized and represented. And I come today to declare that the church has to enter into partnership, not with people who are hurting, but with folk who want to really help, who want to see a sickness, an illness brought to an end, who come with a degree of hope and help. This is the era the church has come to declare that we've got to refocus our attention on hope. If there's one thing I've realized and recognized I pastored in Baltimore now for 43 years. And if there's one thing that becomes clear, that folk do at times lose hope. The words of Langston Hughes ring out. It's almost a day in which hope unborn has died. When you walk on certain streets and see the blight and realize that folk are growing up in a context of blight, you wonder what is their context of blessing. If every day is spent walking past rundown homes and dilapidated places, you begin to wonder what is their prospect for a grand new society. The church must somehow speak a word of hope. If the businesses must, and the enterprise, and the developers, if developers must begin to start saying, we really want to help because we see this as our mission, then churches must understand we must get past our hurt also and start getting to the point where we help. What do you mean, preacher? Well, we're living in a depressing time for churches. Churches are battling how they're going to pay their bills and how they're going to keep things going. It's almost like a Clash of the Titans, where that movie in which the gods felt as if mankind was stopping its worship of them. And so they were beginning to fade away. And the church feels at this time like people don't want to come to church. And so where's our relevance? People don't understand we're here. They need us. No, we're missing the point. We're floating down into a people who need us. And yet we're acting as if they've done something wrong because all we care about is us. Chairman of my deacon board said to me years ago in the early years of pastoring, we were trying to pay off our building. We had bought a new building. We were downtown. Cost us more money than anybody in the church made. We paid $215,000 for that building. $215,000. Nobody in the church made that much money. Nobody made half that much money. That's what we paid. And I remember sitting there wondering, how are we going to pay for this building? Oh my God, we're not growing like we thought. The projections aren't where they should be. And I remember wondering how I was going to collect the offering. And the chairman of my board said this to me. He said, Doc, some of you who've got those chairmen know what I'm talking about. Doc, let me tell you something. A couple things I want you to understand. People don't join debt. So don't advertise you're poor because you're poor. I said, but Deacon, we need to raise this money. He said, then raise it. But don't advertise you're poor because you're poor. Because folk don't join debt. So I never talked about being broke, though we were very close. Not far up the river from being broke. A hard tide would have taken us over a waterfall. But he said, don't advertise you're poor because you're poor. And what he was really saying was, remember who you are. You the church. You the church. In the 70s when I went to school, the big question on the church, there were two big questions. One was the church growth movement, growing your church. The heterogeneous model of growing your church around heterogeneous themes, people of like mind, people of like thought, growing that church. But then there was another argument or another issue. How should we view the church? Should the church be viewed as an organization or as an organism? Oh, that was the great debate. And, everybody knew where you were coming down. The church is an organism. It is not just an organization. It is not just a sociological phenomenon in our midst. It is the living, breathing embodiment of Jesus Christ. It is the visible presence of Christ on earth. That is the church. But in modern day era, we're acting like the church is an organization that we have to make sure survives. Y'all miss that. That somehow our mission and calling in life is to make sure that the New Beulah Free Hope Baptist Community Holiness Church is still here next week. That our sole solitary mission from God is to maintain something somebody else put in place. If there's one line I shall never forget, and I always hold it in abeyance in my own life, everything that has a beginning has an end. Somebody needs to hear that. Every great era of the church ends and births another. There were always those who tried to hold on to what it was and had to realize it had to let go for what it should be. And it came out of that through the crisis of the moments in which it passed. It was birthed. New iterations of the church were birthed. Each time it got in crisis over whether it maintained the organization or accepted the fact that it is an organism that will live. We don't have to worry about whether it'll live. It will live. It'll live because it's needed. It is needed. And we have to revisit the fact. We have to go back to the hope that we have, that we are the church of the living God. We're not just an organization. We can't just set up and try to make sure our choirs are in place and our ushers are in place. We have to remember we are alive for a reason, to redeem the time. To redeem the time. And so we have partners on one hand who have to get past their hurting and start helping. And we have churches on the other hand that have to get past their hurting and start helping. One recognizes it from the value of a virtue, and one recognizes it from the mission of God. God sent us to give hope to broken people. Whether they're in the suburbs where there are limited resources, or whether they're in the city where there are underfunded resources, we exist to make sure people have good housing, good lives, good markets, good businesses, good everything. And we do it by entering into partnerships with people who agree with us. We move beyond the narrow and the myopic concern of our own situation and recognize the life force that lives in us for change. Churches come alive when they start making change. Let me say that again. Churches come alive when they connect with the mission of Jesus. They get sick and die from an infection that is terminal when they think that their continuation is the prime objective and the prime directive of God. But when they hook up with the mission of Jesus, something comes alive in them. And the interesting thing, when they see need in others and want to help it, and stop giving away everything they have just to maintain their existence, what happens is they find that God provides the resources for everything they need to do. There are good partners out here. Do not fool yourself. There are partners out here who are concerned with more than profits. There are partners out here who have a vested interest in seeing society better. There are partners out here who believe that if we give people a chance, we'll see where that chance can go. Who believe in a multiplier effect of good. And our responsibility as churchmen and churchwomen is to find them and to work with them to create better housing. Not just housing, to bring better industry. Not just industry, but to bring into the community, both suburb and urban, everything necessary to kill the infection. This infection is spreading. Now we have, and I'm almost done, we have a drug problem in America. Oh, I love how it's labeled pharmaceutical. Oh, don't you realize anything is pharmaceutical? Weed is pharmaceutical. Now that it's legalized, it's cannabis. And what is it, CBL? But it's weed. It's weed. Oxycodone, Oxycontin, speed, LSD. Now we have a drug problem. The infection is morphing. The infection is now moving beyond the impoverished and is beginning to find its way into the lifeblood of the prosperous. it's easier for them to have it forgotten. They have means available to them that makes what's happened in their lives less visible to everybody. While those in the suburbs who are impoverished and those in the inner cities who are impoverished have it blasted over every opportunity they try to get. But the infection is spreading. And now God has a leaf floating down into the midst of this illness, like a leaf floating from a tree on a November afternoon. And he's raising up people above the fray who aren't just hurt by what's happened and want to throw a couple dollars at it, but want to help. And somehow he's saying to us, find each other. I did this much for you. I put you with a gospel and you with means in close proximity. Now find each other and do great things and make me proud.